I never expected to see the contents of archive room B13. In fact, I didn't even know it existed until the day they told me I was being reassigned. I'd been working quietly as a data recovery technician for the Siberian division of the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations, a post-Chernobyl bureaucratic invention that became a dumping ground for old Cold War records. My specialty, restoring degraded tape drives and damaged microfilm. It was tedious, but safe. That was, until May 2012, when Colonel Mikhailov summoned me personally. "You've been cleared for Level 9 retrieval," he said without expression. I nodded, trying not to betray my surprise. Level 9 was practically myth. "You'll report to Archive B13, Yakutsk sector." I stared at him. "That's in Tunguska territory," I said, too softly. He only smiled. The Tunguska event had always fascinated me as a boy. A massive explosion in 1908, flattening 2,000 square kilometers of forest. No crater, no bodies, just trees leveled outward like some invisible god had pressed a hand down on the land. Theories range from meteors to alien spacecraft to Nikola Tesla's Wardenclyffe experiment. But no one ever mentioned Archive B13. That's because it wasn't supposed to exist. Officially, it was decommissioned in 1991, right after the Soviet Union collapsed. But here I was, boarding a military transport to a frozen ghost town where the sun barely rose in June. The other technicians didn't talk to me. We weren't even told the name of the base, only its GPS coordinates: 60.8858 and 101.8940E. The bunker was buried under 14 meters of permafrost, sealed behind rusted blast doors, with the old Soviet emblems still visible, the hammer and sickle fading into time. Inside, the air smelled of ammonia, iron, and something moisture, mold, or maybe old fear. The lights flickered. We passed long corridors with cracked linoleum and Soviet propaganda peeling off the walls. This is where the classified meteorology data was kept. My escort, Major Levin, lied. I knew it was a cover. No one brings 4 armed guards to protect weather logs. When we reached room B13, the guards inserted 3 separate keys. The lock hissed. The door opened like a vault, revealing rows of filing cabinets, data tapes, and lead-sealed containers. A faint hum echoed through the concrete. The files were labeled cryptically: T-Codex or Zephyr Fragment, Project Silencer, and Subject 40 Delta. Some were printed in Cyrillic, others in English. That surprised me. I opened a drawer labeled Operation Mirror Wake, 1962. Inside were memos from the KGB and what looked like American CIA correspondence, redacted in black bars. One note caught my eye. Echoes continue beneath the zone. Recommend full containment by Q for 1962. Tunguska remains unstable. Do not re-enter until further notice. CG. Beneath it was a photograph. It showed a man in a hazmat suit standing in front of a massive black stone, half buried in snow, inscribed with symbols I didn't recognize. Behind him, trees curved inward unnaturally, not snapped, but bent, like pulled towards something. That night, I couldn't sleep in my assigned quarters. Something was wrong. There was a humming, not mechanical, but deeper, resonating through the floor like the bass line of the earth. At 2:14 a.m., the lights went out. I heard footsteps outside my door, followed by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I opened the door slowly. No one was there, but the humming was louder. I followed it down a maintenance corridor marked restricted. At the end was a sealed steel hatch with a biometric scanner. Strangely, it opened as I approached. No one had scanned anything. Inside was a sub-basement lined with servers and CRT monitors. On one screen, a waveform looped endlessly. A voice, mechanical, faint repeated. Echo, 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 entry denied. Code black 88. The next morning, Major Levin looked pale. "You went to Sub 1 last night," he said without preamble. I didn't lie. What is that place? I asked. He shook his head. You were never there. That's how you stay alive. He handed me a dossier. Inside were recovery logs from 1938, documenting a Soviet expedition to Ground Zero. They'd uncovered what was called the fragment chamber. The logs described an obsidian-like structure embedded deep in the earth, impossible to drill or sample. The team had suffered severe psychological effects, hallucinations, time loss, and in one case, spontaneous nosebleeds and seizures. The mission was abruptly terminated. 3 of the 5 members went missing. The remaining 2 were institutionalized. Their names were classified, but a handwritten note said, "Identical symptoms reported at Dyatlov Pass, 1959, possible link." I kept working through the files obsessively. One reel-to-reel tape from 1975 featured distorted audio, but with noise reduction. I isolated a voice. A woman, in English. I can hear them beneath the ice. They're not dead, they're waiting. The voice broke into sobs. That clip was labeled, Langley Session, Interview Number 23, Tunguska Anomalous. Why was the CIA hoarding this? Why was it stored here? I dug deeper. Turns out there was a joint US-Soviet operation in 1972 under Project Aeronauts, hidden beneath the guise of scientific collaboration during détente. They drilled at coordinates within the blast zone, claiming it was geothermal research. But the drill logs revealed magnetic field disruptions and seismic anomalies. The data abruptly stops after entry number 47, where it just reads, "They opened it." I started suffering migraines, vivid dreams of light cracking the sky, trees groaning like metal under stress. In one dream, I was in the middle of the flattened forest, standing over the black stone from the photograph. It pulsed, almost breathing. A whispering came from it, in a language I couldn't understand. Or maybe I could, but had forgotten. The next day, I checked the facility's personnel logs and found something disturbing. My name had been added to a clearance list dated April 18, 2009, but I hadn't applied for any reassignment that year. I was working in St. Petersburg then. Someone, or something, had been preparing for my arrival long before I ever stepped foot here. The paranoia started to creep in. I began seeing shadows where there were none, reflections in monitors that didn't match the room behind me. When I brought it up to the other techs, they avoided my gaze. One muttered, "You're hearing it too, aren't you?" before quickly walking away. I decided to revisit the sealed container marked Subject 40 Delta. Inside was a radiation-shielded canister, no larger than a shoebox. Taped to it was a crumpled label, recovered 7 kilometers northwest of epicenter. June 27, 1956. Emit frequency, 17.2 Hz. Do not activate. I didn't open the box, but just being near it gave me a pressure behind the eyes, like my brain was swelling against my skull. Later, I found out that 17.2 Hz matches the Schumann resonance, the natural frequency of the Earth's atmosphere. My assignment was supposed to be 14 days. By day 9, I wasn't sure what day it was. The clocks inside B13 didn't match. Some ran fast, others slow. One showed the date as December 21, 1908. I found a debriefing file labeled Red Note 9 to be, authored by someone named Dr. Emmerich Vlasov. The document, translated from German, described a hypergeometric object that had interacted non-linearly with surrounding spacetime. It theorized that Tunguska wasn't an explosion, but a temporal event, a rupture. There were coordinates scrawled in red pen beneath it. I input them into my field terminal. They pointed to Lake Checo, long rumored to be the impact site, but recent studies claimed it had formed before 1908. That contradicted every mainstream theory. I knew I wouldn't find peace until I went to the site myself. I submitted a field request under the guise of tape drive repair for Outpost E9, which was conveniently close to the Tunguska epicenter. It was granted, but with one condition: I couldn't go alone. They assigned me a guide, a retired Spetsnaz named Gregory. He didn't speak much. As we rode a snowcat through the endless Siberian taiga, he handed me an old Soviet issue Geiger counter. "You'll want this," he said quietly. The closer we got to ground zero, the weirder things became. Trees were bent in unnatural shapes, no animal tracks. Our compass needle spun in slow circles. When we camped for the night, the sky was completely silent. No wind, no insects, not even the sound of our breath. The following morning, we reached the flat zone, the area still devoid of full regrowth even after more than a century. The forest gave way to an eerie, open expanse. Burned trunks still stood in rows, like petrified soldiers. In the center was a shallow depression. I stepped into it and immediately felt the world shift. My vision dimmed at the edges. Static buzzed in my ears. The Geiger counter began to tick erratically. Not fast, not slow, just wrong. Like a language I wasn't meant to understand. Gregory stood still, eyes wide. He whispered, "They say this is where time skips." I bent down and brushed away snow. Beneath it, I found a fragment of black stone, smooth and warm to the touch, though the temperature was below freezing. It vibrated faintly, like a heartbeat. That night, we didn't sleep. Gregory said he kept hearing a child's voice calling his name. I heard something else, a deep tone, like a cello string being plucked inside my skull. At 3:16 a.m., our satellite phone rang. We hadn't turned it on. The screen was cracked and the battery was dead. But it rang, I answered. The voice on the other end was mine. "Do not bring it back." The line went dead. We packed in silence. On our way back to the outpost, I checked my camera. Every photo I took of the black fragments was blank, pure white, overexposed, as if the camera couldn't comprehend what it had seen. I pocketed the fragments anyway. I had to know more. That was my first mistake. Back at Archive B13, the fragment began to affect electronics. Hard drives wiped themselves, screens flashed symbols I'd only seen on the black stone in the photos. One technician had a seizure after brushing against it. Major Levin confronted me in the hallway, eyes bloodshot, hand trembling on his holster. "You brought it in," he hissed. "Do you understand what you've done?" I asked him what it was. He looked at me, pale as snow. "It's not from the sky. It's from before the sky." That phrase burned into me. He handed me a folder, unmarked. Inside were pages from the Tunguska archive, titled Cuneiform Artifacts, Prevent Contact Attempts. There were notes referencing Sanskrit texts, Babylonian star maps, and a page from Tesla's 1908 Colorado Springs journals. All highlighted a similar frequency, 17.2 Hz. That's when it hit me. Tesla's final experiment in 1908. The one he allegedly tested with the Wardenclyffe Tower, claiming he could transmit energy wirelessly across continents, happened the same week as Tunguska. And where did he aim that energy? Toward the Arctic Circle. I found a declassified American memo dated July 9, 1947, labeled Project Prism Echo. It detailed attempts to map anomalous feedback loops from Tesla's last experiment. One section stood out. Reverberations detected in Siberian interior, suggestive of non-Euclidean reflection. The signal bounced back. Whatever Tesla hit, it wasn't the atmosphere. It was something under the earth, or inside it. That black stone, it wasn't an object, it was an anchor. Over the next few days, Archive B13 deteriorated. Staff began disappearing. No alarms, no notices. Their names were quietly erased from the shift logs. One morning, I found Gregory's bunk empty, the bedsheets soaked in dark fluid that wasn't blood. No one mentioned him again. When I tried to report the events to Moscow HQ, my access credentials were revoked. I was locked out of the system. I received a message through the secure channel that read, "Close mirror wake, sync remains, burn index." I recognized the codename from one of the tapes. Mirror Wake wasn't a project, it was a protocol. A failsafe for when containment failed. I checked the central server again. One file remained. Its title was just a date, June 30th, 1908. The file wasn't a document, it was a video, clearly restored from film stock. It showed a massive forest, viewed from a high altitude, likely from a dirigible or early airship. Then, without warning, the treetops twisted in on themselves, the sky flashed white, and the black ripple surged outward from the center. It didn't look like fire or an explosion. It looked like space itself had torn. In the final frame, before the reel cut out, a silhouette appeared, tall, elongated, with limbs too thin for its body. It wasn't moving. It was staring at the camera, at me. I slammed my laptop shut and turned around. The corridor behind me was empty, but I could feel someone watching. I planned to leave, to vanish, but then came the dream. I was standing over Lake Checo, frozen over. Beneath the ice, I saw faces, human, contorted in agony, eyes wide and open, as if suspended mid-scream. A voice whispered, "Memory is the prison. Tunguska is the key." I awoke drenched in sweat, the black fragments glowing faintly beside my bed. That day, I made a copy of everything, every file, every image. I encrypted it onto a drive and mailed it anonymously to a journalist in Irkutsk who used to write about UFOs. I don't know if he ever received it. He died in a car crash 2 weeks later. No witnesses, brakes cut, official cause, mechanical failure. After that, everything changed. Cameras inside the facility stopped working, but only in certain wings, always the ones where the black stone was stored or where the redacted files were kept. Security patrols doubled, yet I saw fewer people. The few I did pass in the corridors walked strangely, like they were sleepwalking or listening to something distant only they could hear. One technician scratched spirals into the walls with his fingernails. Another stared at a blank monitor for 8 hours straight. I tried asking Levin what was happening. He finally cracked. "It's waking up," he muttered. Every 90 years, the pulse. That's why they built the archive, not to study it. To contain the leak, but it's too late. I ran, or at least, I tried. The exit corridors were sealed. My passcode no longer worked. My files, my personal effects agon. I resorted to the old maintenance tunnel beneath the mess hall, a rusted shaft marked service line -1944. It hadn't been used in decades. Inside, I crawled for what felt like hours, lit only by my phone. About halfway through, the signal returned, 1 bar, just enough. I sent a message to my brother in Belarus. "If I go dark, check folder G3 on backup drive. Don't trust anyone." Moments later, my phone shut down permanently, battery full, but completely dead. Something electromagnetic, or something worse. The tunnel exited near a frozen river, where an old Soviet watchtower stood, long abandoned. I climbed it and waited. For what? I wasn't sure. The next morning, a convoy of black unmarked trucks arrived at the main entrance of Archive B13. Men in hazmat suits unloaded heavy metal crates. Some bore American insignias, joint operation. Or something more secretive. I watched through binoculars as they carried one of the crates toward the woods, toward the flattened zone. It was lead sealed and marked with this: "Return to Vault 17 Groom Lake." That's when it hit me. Groom Lake, Area 51. The Americans knew. Maybe they always had. Tunguska wasn't just a Soviet problem. I made it back to Novosibirsk after 4 days, half frozen, surviving on melted snow and adrenaline. I didn't go home. I stayed off-grid, renting rooms under fake names, bouncing between old university contacts and sympathetic fringe researchers. That's when I found someone, Professor Ivan Morozov, a geophysicist who'd been blacklisted in 1987 for claiming that Tunguska was a dimensional fracture. I showed him my data. He went pale. "This matches what we saw in Antarctica in 1994, he said. "Same symbols, same frequency, same loss of time, Antarctica. That had never been mentioned in any files I saw. But I remembered, Project Mirrorwake had a sub-entry, Phase 2, Concordia. Then I got the letter, no return address, no stamps. Just an envelope slid under my motel door. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, no heading. It read, 'You have 30 days. After that, we cannot guarantee containment. Stop digging.' Attached was a Polaroid, a photo of me, taken from behind, watching the black stone fragment on my motel nightstand. I was alone in the room, or so I thought. I left the city that night, threw the stone into the Iritish River, burned my notes. But it was too late. I was already marked. I started experiencing time gaps, hours, even days, that I couldn't recall. I'd find scratches on my arms in the same spiral shapes etched in the bunker walls. I'd hear the hum in my dreams, low, rhythmic, almost soothing, like a lullaby from before civilization. I went to a neurologist, normal scans, no tumors, no trauma. But his assistant pulled me aside. "You're the 4th person this month," she whispered. All from the same region, all hearing the hum. That's when I knew the pulse had already begun. Whatever was buried in Tunguska had stirred, and it was leaking. I started writing everything down. Not to expose them, not to warn the world, just to make sense of it. But every time I tried to upload the files, something corrupted them. My drives reformatted. Internet connections failed. Metadata replaced itself with coordinates 60.89 to 1, 101.89 for 5E, slightly off from the original epicenter. I went back to that spot on satellite imagery. A small structure had appeared there recently, rectangular, non-reflective. Government database labeled it Weather Station 43 Delta, but I knew better. That wasn't a weather station. That was a containment spire. Containment of what? The more I pieced together, the more it made sense. The black stone, the anchor. The frequency, the key. Tunguska was the lock. But locks are only necessary when something dangerous is trying to get out, or back in. I remembered the woman on the 1975 tape. They're not dead. They're waiting. What if the Tunguska event wasn't an explosion? What if it was a seal being slammed shut? A forceful attempt to trap something that had briefly emerged into our dimension. And now, over a century later, the seams were coming loose. Tesla tried to tap into limitless energy, but what if that power came from them? The pulse, the signal, the entity, whatever name fits. I think he tried to close it, or contain it, before the Americans shut him down. The strange thing is, I found one more document in my encrypted backups. It was ACI-MO dated June 27, 2008, marked top secret. Eyes only. It read, approaching centennial resonance. Reinforce Tunguska perimeter. Do not allow atmospheric bleed. Local anomalies already active. No further testing authorized. Await sundial protocol. Sundial. That was never mentioned in any Russian file. That was US code. Now I know why they wanted me in Archive B13. Not to retrieve data, to test exposure thresholds. I was the subject all along, and it worked. I carry it now. The pulse, the signal is in me. Sometimes, when I stare too long into the static on a television, I see the forest again. I see the stone. I hear the whispers. I feel the tremor beneath my feet. And worst of all, I feel it coming back every 90 years. The pulse returns stronger. 1908, 1998, 2088. We're in the active phase now. That's why the documents ended in 2008. They didn't plan beyond this point, because they didn't know what would happen. I'm recording this now from a bunker in Kazakhstan. I don't know how much time I have. The lights flicker, the clocks spin. I saw my reflection blink when I didn't. I found a new scar on my chest this morning, in the shape of the spirals. I didn't put it there. Maybe this message will never reach you. Maybe it shouldn't. But if you're listening, if you're reading, you need to understand Tunguska was not the beginning. It was a warning, and we've ignored it. What's buried beneath Siberia was never dead. It was dreaming, and now it's stirring once more. If you still think this is fiction, I envy you. I truly do. Because once you've seen the truth behind the Tunguska archive, you can't ever unsee it. You'll hear the hum in old machines. You'll notice time behaving strangely in remote places. You'll see patterns in clouds that aren't natural. You'll feel the pressure behind your eyes, just before sleep or contact. I leave this story not as a whistleblower, not as a scientist, but as a man already lost. The archive wasn't built to store the past. It was built to hold the future at bay. And that future is coming faster than we're prepared for. Dr. Alexei Volkov, former Level 9 technician, Ministry of Emergency Situations, Yakutsk sector. Testimony retrieved from flash drive found in abandoned weather station. Status unverified.